Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and ask scholars to pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Today we deconstruct Tuesday night's GOP debate on the economy, which, by the way, had some welcome substance on the minimum wage, income taxes, plus the usual speechifying. Also today, we'll learn how intricately the nation is split, not simply polarized left and right and red and blue states, but a patchwork nation of nuanced differences visible at the county level. First, though, as the dust settles from the debate, we check the condition of the turf. Yes, time for the horse race. No clear wins or stumbles in the debate, but let's look at the results overnight from a prediction market where people bid candidates up or down as if they were stocks. According to the market research project PredictIt, Marco Rubio will benefit most from last night's debate. His market price beating out another big winner last night, Ted Cruz. Not a bad night out for either candidate, as they have been making polling strides in recent weeks, too. Notice that Jeb Bush is also in the running for winning the night that many think was a make-or-break event for his floundering campaign. Who is the biggest loser of the evening? PredictIt has Ben Carson winning the race to the bottom, sharing the booby prize with another potential big loser of the evening, Donald Trump, with... But wait, Jeb Bush, who is in that winning column, is also seen by many as losing the night. Perhaps he's not out of the woods yet. So where does that leave the leaders of the Republican field the day after the debate? Back to the markets, but this time to online wagering site Betfair, where people are investing real money, over $500,000 of it, on the result. Marco Rubio has the best odds at 2.5 to 1. That means for every dollar bettors lay down, they get back $2.50 if Rubio is the nominee. The Donald is a much riskier bet, though he's next in line at about 6 to 1. Ted Cruz is in third place at about 9 to 1, with Jeb Bush in the same ballpark at 10 to 1. Ben Carson, who had been doing well in the polls, despite some press investigations into his origin story, sits in fifth place at 12 to 1. Republicans attacked Hillary Clinton often in this most recent debate, assuming she will face one of them in the general election, and recent poll numbers only confirm her front-runner status massively. According to the polling firm Public Policy Polling, among likely voters, Clinton leads Sanders 72% to 18% now, which falls in line with overall polling trends. So which Republican has the best chance of beating Clinton? Real Clear Politics, that site, its averages for the Republican runoff against Clinton have all candidates within striking distance, but Ben Carson is the one who repeatedly wins. At least that's where the polling trends were before last night. Now time to analyze the content of the Fox Business GOP debate on the economy with our guests. Eduardo Porter writes the economic scene for the New York Times. He's been with the Wall Street Journal and has covered the world from Mexico to Japan. Prolific blogger Greg David joins us as well. He writes a column for Crane's New York Business and directs the Business and Economics Reporting Program at the City University of New York's Graduate School of Journalism. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
And let me jump right into a clip from the debate. A few minutes in, the candidates were asked about raising the minimum wage to $15, a goal now for labor activists nationally. Here's part of Ben Carson's response.
As far as the minimum wage is concerned, people need to be educated on the minimum wage. Every time we raise the minimum wage, the number of jobless people increases. It's particularly a problem in the black community. Only 19.8% of black teenagers have a job who are looking for one. You know, that's because of those high wages. If you lower those wages, that comes down.
So, Greg, let's do a fact check right off the bat. If you raise wages to $15 minimum wages. Is there science, one way or the other, that shows whether the number of jobs actually decreases?
Here's what we know. All the recent research shows minimal to no job loss when the minimum wage is raised. But that research applies to relatively small increases and is basically comparing two adjacent statewide areas. We have never raised the minimum wage so much in such a short time, so the answer is we don't know what will happen.
Eduardo, anything to add?
That's right. I mean, and this is not even very controversial. Most economists would agree with this statement. I mean, there's a few holdouts that say that minimum wages do cause unemployment, but mostly we know that there is very, very little effect within the small kind of parameters that we've seen in the past.
The politics of what he said at the end there, that this is bad for the black community and jobs disappear when they have the high wages. He used the phrase high wages,
yes,
referring to like $10 an hour.
Exactly.
What do you make of that?
Oh, well, I mean, I find it pretty absurd that you would consider $15 an hour a spectacular wage. I mean, the minimum wage here has been declining for years and years. And so if we have a problem with wages in this country, especially amongst people below sort of like the middle, it's been a decline. If you look at the stats, you'll see declining wages for all sorts of groups below the 50th percentile from the 1970s.
You know, that wasn't the only comment. Trump's comment was even more significant, in which he said wages are just too high. He didn't mean that just for the minimum wage. I think he meant it in terms of, I'm going to bring all these jobs back to America, but I guess he's going to bring them back at a very low level. But, you know...
Why would he think that wages are too high if Americans seem to be struggling so much with wage stagnation and affordability?
I don't think Trump thinks wage stagnation is a big deal. But I think it's very interesting that that's the way all the Republican candidates think. All the Republican candidates do not care. There was almost no concern on that panel last night about inequality. And Republican candidates must think that the voters in the primaries are not those people who would benefit from a minimum wage.
Yeah. I mean, the one policy that came up that was kind of like directed at the bottom of the income ladder, which was Rubio's proposal to increase the child tax credit, actually came in for criticism. I mean, the way that it came into the debate was Rand Paul attacking him for increasing government spending with that.
But this makes it sound like the Republican voters are all in the Wall Street elite or something like that. I mean, there was just that study that came out that showed that what I think is the Republican core, middle-aged 40s and 50s white people without college degrees are dying at a higher rate than they used to in the past because of drug addiction and suicide. In other words, among white, non-college educated, middle-aged people, which I think is the Republican base, there's incredible despair. This is not a population then that would think that there's no wage stagnation, or what am I missing?
Well, perhaps it's a question of feeling that you are giving something to somebody else, which is, I think, how many of this base believes any sort of government program. It's like a handout to somebody that hasn't worked as hard as he or she.
Anything different on that?
No, actually, so I go to the gym in the morning as this group of white men are finishing and leaving, and they are just like all those candidates. They're probably a little higher up the income level. A couple of them at least own their own businesses, and they love those candidates. They're not part of the Wall Street elite, but they believe every dollar in government spending is going to those people who are not working as hard as they're working. And I can't tell you, every day there must be 10 nasty Obama comments in the morning.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that group isn't of the Wall Street elite. They don't like the Wall Street elite. But what those Republican candidates are saying does appeal to them.
Yeah. You could see that in the support for Trump's wall against Mexican immigrants, right? It's folks that see these others coming in to take what is theirs. You know, folks that grew up when the United States was a mostly white a country that are now kind of shaken by the fact that it is becoming much, much more diverse, and see all these others in positions and spaces that they used to occupy alone.
And Ted Cruz was trying to step out in the debate last night, trying to own some of that territory, even while other candidates like Bush and Kasich were pushing against Trump's anti-immigrant policies as anti-American. Let's see how Ted Cruz talked about the idea of the border as it plays in countries we see ourselves competing with.
Try going to China or Japan. Try going to Mexico. See what they do. Every sovereign nation secures its borders, and it is not compassionate to say we're not going to enforce the laws and we're going to drive down the wages for millions of hardworking men and women. That is abandoning the working man.
So politically, Greg, I get the sense that the Republican establishment, whatever that is really afraid of a candidate like Trump or Cruz getting the nomination on this issue, because 2012 hinged so much on Latino voters in swing states like Colorado. And if they're going to alienate so many Latino voters, then there's no path to victory there.
Well, I think that's what we think, but I don't think that's what Republicans think anymore, because we first expected the Republicans to try to get this issue off the table, and then it ended. Rubio, who was interested in immigration reform, has now moved substantially in the other direction. It is clear that the Republican candidates have decided that they cannot win primaries unless they are adamantly anti-immigration, with two exceptions, as we saw, Bush and Kasich. And the interesting question is it because they're not even thinking about getting to the general election? Or have they decided it's going to play out differently this time? I don't know the answer to that.
Could it be, do you think, that just the fact that a Cruz or a Rubio, or in particular Cruz and Rubio, are Latino themselves, that it balances out whatever undocumented immigrant position they may take in terms of who comes to vote for them?
Surely not. I think if anybody's thinking that, it's a very big mistake. Cruz and Rubio aren't quite the Latino candidate that could bring in like the Mexican-American vote that is going to be so important in states like Colorado and New Mexico.
Right. I mean, remember, they only need to increase. They don't need to win a majority to beat the Democrat in these swing states that they lost in 2012. They need to increase by some percent. So we see Carson, for example, polling, I think, 17% among black people. Well, that's not a lot, but that's 10% more than Romney got.
But it's the turnout question. An angry Latino electorate, first of all, the country's more Latino and more diverse than it was 4 years ago. So an angry electorate that registers and goes to the polls, I mean, would overwhelm any tiny increase. It's, on all these issues we've talked about, what's very unclear is that normally you would expect the Republicans to try to move a little bit to the center when the primary is over.
Yes.
But I don't see how most of these candidates, especially the ones at the top of the polls, are going to do that. And
we already saw this kind of like 4 years ago. It was very, very difficult to move Trump to the center from the very extreme positions that were espoused in the primary. I think that it's right that right now they're just thinking in terms of primaries. They haven't thought beyond to the issue of electability. And so yesterday it was Ted Cruz trying to take out Rubio because they're going to, I think, try to run in the same lane. And this was an attempt to use Rubio's former support for immigration reform against him.
So we have some of these same white Republican base voters who think that even if they're struggling, government programs intended to try to help them are really going to wind up taking from them and giving to even poorer, mostly minority people who they may even see as undeserving. At the same time, though, I think a lot of those voters don't like Wall Street and have something now that they may not have had 10 or 20 years ago against big corporations, including big banks. Yeah. And in that context, help me decipher this bite from the debate from Marco Rubio, where he seems to say that the Dodd-Frank law meant to regulate Wall Street after the financial crisis actually enables them even more. Watch.
And in Dodd-Frank, you have actually codified too big to fail. We have actually created a category of systemically important institutions, and these banks go around bragging about it. You know what they say to people with a wink and a nod? We are so big, we are so important that if we get in trouble, the government has to bail us out. This is an outrage. We need to repeal Dodd-Frank as soon as possible.
So who of you can translate that into English? The banks are too big, therefore we need to remove the regulation on them, huh?
Well, yes, it's the fact that the regulation accepts that these institutions exist is already anathema. But I found it pretty wild that not just Rubio, but Jeb Bush, pretty much everybody across the board was taking a shot at two big banks. And I thought that this was, part of the base. I remember George W. Bush calling this group of people his base. And so it was amazing to see Jeb Bush saying that they were banks that were too big to fail and that we had to bring them down to size. I'm not sure that this survives into a Republican administration, but I felt that the sentiment was, if you were looking for some sort of the populist part of the debate to come up, it showed up specifically.
And maybe
but it is so cynical. Yeah. I mean, it is completely cynical here because it is designed to liberate these banks to be what they want to be. It is as much as you want to say, to try to get in the mind of these people, it is the completely cynical approach. It is trying to capitalize on that sentiment in order to unleash the finance industry that finances these candidates. So, it's very interesting to say, oh yeah, it's appealing to the populism, but of all the things the Republicans are doing, this is almost the most cynical.
So stay there. We're going to go to break down the country now, not by red state and blue state, but county by county, and see which voters are where, and then we'll bring you guys back in. Time for evidence-based politics, where we attempt to erase political cliches. Not surprisingly, the notion that there are just two Americas, red and blue states, is simplistic and misleading. It obscures a more nuanced political patchwork of attitudes and identities and visions during this election season. We might be asking, where exactly is the America that keeps the Donald Trumps and Ben Carsons so high in the polls? Where precisely is Bernie Sanders' America? Here to give us an understanding of the electorate at a more granular level, journalist Dante Chinni, director of the American Communities Project and author of Our Patchwork Nation, The Surprising Truth About the Real America. His columns appear in the Wall Street Journal and NBC. Dante joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. But Dante, at a more granular level, where are you precisely?
At a more granular level, I'm in a big city in Washington, D.C., in the middle of the Beltway.
All right, that's as good as any place to start. Let's put up a map of the United States broken down by your county types. And let's start with our own region, the corner of the Northeast that's mostly dark orange and light orange here. Are those big cities, what you call big city counties in the Northeast corridor?
So what we do is the Northeast corridor, mostly no. I mean, what you have is New York City and the 5 boroughs qualify as this thing we call big cities. And those areas all around it we call urban suburbs. That's the dark orange. And that light orange around those are areas called middle suburbs. They're places a little less dense and also a little less diverse. The urban suburbs in big cities are increasingly look similar in terms of their really racial and ethnic makeup and in terms of income levels, education levels, things like that.
And let's do a quick tour through some of these really big swaths. All of that green in the southeast going across toward Texas through Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas. Is that the county type you call the African-American South, which is so big in the Democratic primary?
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, we're looking at geography when we look at this. So a lot of counties in there, and you can see it is when we do these types, the American Communities Project. Some are geographic; they really are. They're based in regions in the country, and some are really spotty, like the metropolitan United States has kind of become a type all to itself, really.
So,
but yeah, that area down there, yeah.
When Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders had that forum on MSNBC last week in South Carolina, which is part of that section, and Sanders spent the whole time trying to introduce himself to Black America, because he doesn't have that base from Vermont like Hillary Clinton does from her experience. That's what it was about, because these states have a lot of primary delegates, right?
Yeah, that's right. And just in terms of the calendar, you go Iowa, you go New Hampshire, you bounce down south to South Carolina. Bernie Sanders has problems with. I mean, if we see this polling data, I mean, he has problems with African American voters, and that African American South there is going to be very tricky for him. He really does need to introduce himself down there.
We're going to put up a map of the counties of Iowa, and for a relatively small geographic state, there are a whole lot of counties in the state of Iowa, but a lot of this is very blue. And these are your working class counties and rural middle America counties?
A lot of rural middle America, and I don't have the map in front of me, but the way I recall it pretty clearly, in the eastern part of the state, you have a lot of that. You have a lot of that rural middle America, and then you go around, you see around Des Moines, Polk and Dallas County, those are what we call exurbs.
Right in the center, those orange counties?
Yep, but they're like, well, yeah, it should be yellow.
Yeah, yellow. I'm sorry, you're right.
Right, yeah. But those places are, and the reason why Des Moines, or that's really Dallas and Polk County, it's not quite big enough to be a big city, and it's not dense enough really to be an urban suburb, and it's not diverse enough either. It's pretty white, it's pretty spread out.
So what is it about all these blue counties that make them go for Donald Trump and Ben Carson?
Well, those places have really been left behind in a lot of ways in what's happened economically in this country. I mean, the nice thing about breaking down the counties this way and getting beyond red and blue is we're using a lot of other factors, including economic factors. We're talking about employment, education levels, rural middle America, and working class country in particular, lower education levels, lower incomes. And to be honest, those are tougher places to find work. There aren't as many opportunities for employment out there. If you're talking about places that have kind of been left behind in the changing American economy, it's those places. Also, to some extent, the evangelical communities, really, they've taken a real hit. There just aren't as many opportunities to get ahead in those places.
Right. Greg, Eduardo, any questions for Dante? What's revealed to you by seeing these?
How do political preferences map onto these colors? I mean, is there consistency across these different types?
Yeah, actually there is. We didn't do it. The nice thing is we didn't use that as a factor when we put this together, but it really does show how they fall in line with these things. Big cities, Obama won those places by about 31 points. The urban suburbs, kind of the next ring out, that dark orange, he won those by about 16 points. Middle suburbs, Romney won by about 5. And then the exurbs is really like the transition point where you go, those places, 16 points for Romney. You get down to some of these places, the evangelical centers, more than 20 points for Romney. The college towns, just as light, kind of a light brown on there, those went Democratic by about 6 points. African American South went Democratic by about 5 points.
Does this all indicate that we're even more polarized than the red and blue state paradigm would suggest that we are, because people are dividing up at the county level and living with people like them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one way to look at it. I think the other way to look at it, the other way I like to think of it too, is that the red and blue differences, the red and blue is just a manifestation of a lot of other things in the way we live our lives. It's a manifestation increasingly of education level, income level, definitely of urban density, diversity. And when you live around, we have, I don't want to say we've completely self-segregated, because some of us have chosen to live in, you choose to live in a big city or a big urban suburb. A lot of these rural places, it's just where you're born, and you're going to live there. And maybe some of the people leave there, and when they leave there, they go to the big cities. And it's not that they go to big cities, big and urban areas, and become liberal. We don't know that for sure. Maybe they moved to those places because they had more of a liberal mindset to begin with. But it's definitely a pretty clear fault line when you look at the country this way.
Greg, what are you thinking?
Well, we've been discussing why those people left behind are Republican voters, and why in Iowa even more conservative Republican voters will dominate the primary, and why those people left behind aren't open, amenable to the kind of economic and social policies of the Democrats. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the Democrats have kind of defined themselves. It's a diversity issue, right? It's a racial issue, I think, to some extent. The Democrats are really defined now as an urban party. I would say two things. Maybe if you live in a big city, you may feel like they're voting against their own interest. But the things that motivate these voters are very different as well. I mean, they don't feel the Democratic Party is with them on other issues. They don't feel like they're with them on cultural issues, on issues of faith, things like this.
Let me put up the U.S. map one more time and take a look at that same African-American South swath of the country and ask you, if these deep South states, which we think of as so conservative and so Republican, are so green on this map, that meaning so many African-American voters by percentage, are these potential Democratic states the way the populations are trending?
Well, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is we're looking at geography on these maps, right? So that there are not as many people live in those places. And the other thing to keep in mind with the African-American South, the population of those places is about 40% African-American. But that still means about 50, 60%, 60% other, or 50+% usually white, non-Hispanic. And these places are really evenly divided. So you're talking about, like I said, Democrats won those places by about 5 points. But you get to those exurbs, a lot of exurbs in the African-American, in those big states down there. Particularly look around Atlanta,
right?
Even look in Alabama, Mississippi. A lot of exurbs; those are heavily Republican.
Heavily white, heavily Republican exurbs
Yes.
beyond the suburbs. So, Eduardo, what do you think the impact of the growing Latino population is going to be on the general election, if we can speculate out that far?
Well, if you look at that map, you see the big Latino West that's taking shape, and I think that's just going to become more and more Latino and move into states that were once red and are becoming purple and blue. Colorado, New Mexico. I could see those, maybe at one point even Texas. I think Florida right now is in question because you do have, especially if Rubio is a candidate, he will make a strong, he will have a strong showing in Florida.
And Rubio is Cuban, as is Cruz, Cuban-American. Yeah. And are they really distinct politically from other Latinos as much as before?
Yes, politically, culturally, in their roots, their experience of this country. But you've got to remember that the notion of Latino is a notion that gets invented once you step into the United States. Before that, these guys are Mexicans, Ecuadorians, whatnot, Cubans, and they share language and Catholicism, but there's a lot of stuff that they don't share in terms of their political views and their aspirations and why they even came here. So I would say that the Cuban community is very, very different from the Mexican, Central American community that make up most of the Latino population.
I want to thank all three of you for joining us today. And that is POTUS 2016 for this week. We're here every week at this hour, calling the political horse race and inviting scholars to pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. There is a Democratic debate coming up on Saturday, November 14th on CBS. We'll discuss that next week. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.